There were in Charlotte in 1976. There were only 4 studios that I knew about. There was Arthur Smith. Hank Poole was the chief engineer there. Really nice guy. There was Reflection, which had started on South Boulevard in an old building and had just taken over space on Central from a company that was a video production company that had moved away. There was a room at WBT run by a guy that later opened his own place. And then there was Davis Sound Studios on South Boulevard. So Hank was friendly but said they didn't need anybody. And I talked to Roger Branch at Reflection, and he said that they had just moved over there and they were struggling to getting things afloat and couldn't afford anybody. And at Bob Davis Studios, they said they could take me in. A nice guy, is a nice guy, who had spent some years working in D.C. for NBC. I think he had a mid-level production job of some sort. But married and wanting to raise a family, he decided to move to Charlotte, where I think at least his wife was from. I'm not sure where Bob is from. And in that process, trying to figure out a line of work, he bought a sort of a franchise territory from Kaiser Century, or Century Records it was called. Back in they may have started in the 50s, but certainly by the 60s, Kaiser was a company that made nearly all the vinyl for record pressing in the U.S. They made big cardboard drums, little pellets of vinyl. And in all the pressing plants around the country, those pellets were cooked down into a glob to press out records, and they were the primary supplier. But they set up Century Records, which had loosely protected territories so that somebody could set up and they could make recordings, live recordings typically for schools, churches, kind of like being the recording version of a school photographer, I guess, in a way, but, recording, school groups, orchestras, choirs, churches, and whatnot. So I was working pretty good for Bob. He set up a little truck, and he had some portable systems, and he was doing all right with it, but he was only busy in 2 periods of the year, sort of in the couple of months leading up to Christmas and in the spring and early summer. Otherwise, he had almost nothing to do, and some guys in Nashville who sold equipment said, "Bob, if you open a studio, you'll be busy year-round." And so he did. He took over an old radio station and built a little studio in there, and he had a console that had rotary faders, knobs, and a 1-inch 8-track deck that was the size of 2 refrigerators, a huge Ampex MM1000 8-track. And there it sat. He didn't really know what to do with it. So he had some ongoing clients, but not a lot of them. And at the time I got there, the studio was full of storage at that point. It's full of, record orders and whatever stored in there. So I said, I can turn this around, with some probably misplaced confidence. But so I did. I mean, I got busy. I got busy working the clubs and meeting the bands and going out to churches and whoever I could find that could possibly become a studio client. And I got it pretty busy. I mean, I was generally in there 7 days a week. And also in the busy seasons, I did my share of the low budget mobile stuff out there. Driving around in that little van all over Carolinas and Eastern Tennessee and Southern Virginia and down into Georgia and such. Sometimes I would go out for a week at a time, and I would send back postal money orders as I was collecting dough, and via Greyhound. Used to ship a lot on Greyhound at the time. They would send me blank tape. As I rolled around the Carolinas, I had to hit certain bus stops to get my tape, and hit post office during the day to send back money. And also, we had one client. It was some organization out of Atlanta. I'm not sure how we got connected, but it's a couple of guys, and they worked for a production company that did this religious radio show that went on AM radio at 5 o'clock in the morning. couple of reasons right there that I would probably never hear it. But what they did was they would fly to different colleges or wherever around the country and record their choral music, and then they'd take that back to Atlanta and they'd splice that together with some guy speaking, and that was the radio show. So to avoid having to really heavily equip themselves, they contracted our company, and I would road case a bunch of gear and fly to Shreveport or Sioux City, Iowa, or Pennsylvania somewhere, and all these kind of places, usually on small aircraft, and we'd work. But I'm sure those guys are no longer with us, but they were two of the hardest drinking guys I was ever around. I couldn't keep up. But when it was Miller time, they were hitting it. So that made the trips sort of entertaining that way. And then next morning, Bleary would be out there in the morning, recording more choral music. But anyway, I decided on getting back into recording that if I was going to do it, I was going to really do it. And if you're going to really do it, you can't be a part-timer. You really got to dive in with both feet. And so I thought that, I'd had this sort of funny development in Chicago, going from, this little lightweight live stuff up to this heavy-duty studio. And there were just a lot of pieces missing in my learning and experience. So I decided that, newly single, I was going to just really commit myself to recording anything and everything. And part of the thing is that, you don't learn on the big gigs. I mean, you learn, but you should be the big gigs are where you've really got to deliver. When you got a major artist or a major production or something that in one way or another is particularly important. That's not a time to be, fiddling around trying to figure out what you're doing. Those are times to really draw on your experience and deliver the goods. So all those little jobs are fantastic opportunities to learn. So while I'm recording squeaky out-of-tune clarinets in some school somewhere, I'm experimenting with the difference between XY miking and Bloomline stereo miking, and I'm debating the relative merits of large and small diaphragm mics, because if Davis had anything, he had some fabulous microphones.